Hi class, my name is Melissa Sanson and along with my group 1, Julia, Ricardo, and Megan, we would like to present to you Module 1's mini lecture on culture, race, and cultural competence. In the objectives for Module 1, we really see a foundation in understanding the notions of different cultures and the impact that information practices have on really including them. And we also discuss how racial projects and scripts support racial formations. So we sort of understand how one people group against another people group may be completely different and how views and misunderstanding really end up creating more dilemma and more problems. And so through cultural competence, we really see how we're trying to be more accurate and more patient and understanding and not just say that we're including others, but really learning what it is to include others and support others. And so through GLAM space support, we can definitely learn how best to really document diverse groups and really use whatever sources we have and knowledge that we have about a different people group and really do it their way and not just the way that we see through our own lens.
I wanted to briefly discuss our infographic as it was created off of the recommended article, Culture is Ordinary. Although this article was not required to use in the VoiceThread, we included it because of the importance of culture in every human society. Although cultures range, our infographic covers a few of the common aspects of culture itself. Each culture starts with known meanings and directions, but over time will change as new observations and meanings come into play. Within the white space of the infographic, we included a few examples of what can be found in different cultures, such as poems and art. If you have not yet read this article, we highly advise you do so. It repeats the notion of culture is ordinary multiple times, making the article sound almost poetic in itself.
I wanted to expand on cultural competence, mainly what is already laid out in one of our main readings for this week, Latinos in Libraries, Museums, and Archives by Ms. Patricia Montiel Overall, Ms. Annabelle Nunez, and Ms. Veronica Reyes Escudero. What it boils down to is that we, as LIS professionals or as future LIS professionals, we need to recognize the attributes and cultural assets that define the diverse groups that make up our communities. And the ways that we can do that is developing cultural appropriate services, understanding the other, and the other being cultural groups that aren't necessarily the same as our own. We need to make the information space more welcoming and inclusive. So having those that come from said communities be a part of our cultural collective. And then lastly, we need to have diversity over segregation. In my next slide, I wanted to touch on a cultural institution that fully exemplifies the notions that these three authors put forth. Now, the National Museum of African American History and Culture may be unfamiliar to some, but it's actually one of the most exciting additions to the GLAM space in the past decade. It was completed in 2016. It has more than 40,000 objects in its collection. It is a federal institution that is completely dedicated to Black history. It's public, open to all, and anyone is welcome to participate, collaborate, and actually add to this repository or this museum. regarding African American history and culture. Now, what does this really mean in regards to cultural competence in action? According to our three authors, it requires an asset-based approach. And said approach requires acknowledgement of said other. And that's where the four pillars upon which the National Museum of African American History currently stands. The museum, it actually provides an opportunity for those who are interested in Black culture to explore and kind of walk through its history in a very comfortable, approachable, and very respectful way. It also helps all American understand that whatever your story is, whatever your cultural background may be, it can be measured in a academic, scholarly, and again, that word again, respectful way. And that notion of respect actually harkens to another article that we read from this week by Miss Molina in the text "Relational Notions of Race," because the museum actually explores what it means to be an American and shares how American values like resiliency, optimism, and spirituality are also reflected in Black history and culture. And in order for these institutions to provide truthful and respectful representations of the culture they represent, we need LIS professionals, especially at the ground level, that know exactly where these stories are coming from. Now, one of the most important readings for this week is actually the diversity standards for the Association of College and Research Libraries, which in itself is a subgroup of the American Library Association. One of the standards, or really actually one of the goals of the ACRL, is to achieve diversity in substance as well as in form, and that libraries have to open their arms to all perspectives and experiences. And the question becomes, the conundrum is, how exactly do you do that? Well, first off, one of the things you need to do is make sure that you have LIS professionals, librarians, curators, archivists, etc., that represent the communities that you have vouched to serve. So how do we find those individuals from those underrepresented groups and communities? Well, we're going to find out on my next slide. Now, one of the most exciting programs that many colleges and universities are currently instilling is the Diversity Alliance. And what it boils down to is, or are, 2 or 3 year fellowships or residency programs created to increase the pipeline of professional, underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. So, unfortunately, there aren't that many uh, college librarians of color. And those that do graduate from MLIS, they end up just serving in the communities in which they receive their degree. What colleges are trying to do, and being at the precipice of knowledge availability, of trying to increase diversity, they're trying to bring these young librarians out of their shell and grant them the opportunity to work in places that they are usually not represented. And this actually ties back to Miss Marissa Elena Duarte, the author of one of our readings for this week as well, called Network Thinking, where she touches on how having such a diverse range of individuals within cultural institutions allows for a more open space for spreading knowledge. And one of the places that you would assume would be the most diverse would be knowledge and information organizations, but that's simply not true. And to expand further on that notion of the sharing of knowledge and inclusivity in the GLAM space and in LIS, I want to touch on a cultural institution / special collection at Indiana University, which you'll see on the next slide. Now, perhaps I'm being a bit ridiculous here, but I never expected that one of the world's largest Black film archives would be in Bloomington, Indiana. But here we are. It's a special collections repository established in 1981. It's a special collections branch of the Wells Library. And its objective really is just to encourage and preserve all historical aspects, or many of the historical aspects of African American film and filmmakers. And why is this important to the GLAM space? And for those that don't understand the acronym, it actually stands for Galleries, Libraries, Archives, and Museums. But it actually just harkens back to the diversity standards put forth by the ACRL. Essentially, it's just cultural awareness of self and others, cross-cultural knowledge and skills, professional values, Stouch development of collections, programs, and services, cross-cultural leadership, professional education, research, language diversity, service delivery, workforce diversity. These spaces are necessary in order for our institutions, especially our cultural institutions, to be as viable as they can be.
All right, guys, I'm going to be talking to you about documenting the underdocumented and diversifying the historical record as pertaining to Veronica Reyes Escudero's lecture that she gave this week. She listed a bunch of different issues that she comes across when acquiring collections. Those are the issues of mistrust for largely Anglophonic institutions, the language barriers between the people you are trying to receive the collections from, talking to, the basic nature of the collections. There's a lot of people as well that don't think that their material is important enough to be studied or to be preserved, which is really sad. And then a lot of collections are still active at the moment too, which makes it hard for us to be able to receive some of those collections since they're still being added to and that sort of thing. She also listed a bunch of different solutions pertaining to these collections, mainly to listen, to have face-to-face meetings, to listen to the people that you're talking to, find out what's important to them, what are their needs, and just to be there. Another thing that's extremely important is to be aware of the community issues and to recognize those. Another thing that ties back to lost archives is demonstrating the importance of why we need these things and why the collections should be preserved. She also stated that it's really important to continue communication after you receive their collection, just so they can understand how it is still so important and how you can communicate what is going on, what is going to be happening with the collection, and that sort of thing. She works predominantly with the borderlands cultural communities, and she illustrates the commitment to Mexican and Mexican American communities. And she's in charge of building that trust and the outreach to recover some of this archival material. And I think that's very, very important to recognize and show people how important all of this information is. So another thing that Reyes Escudero talks about is digitizing, and she talks about how to ensure the proper care, respect, and preservation, certain guidelines have to be followed almost to a fault with handling these documents. We need to capture the best quality image. We shouldn't alter the image content at all. And if there is a way that you decide to crop all the images or just the materials in general, you need to make sure that that cropping decision is universal throughout the whole entire collection. Another really important thing is having bilingual descriptions, especially when you're documenting the underdocumented, so they can see what you are doing with the collection, how you're using the information. This provides a lens to both communities or multiple communities, as you can see how this information ties in to everyone. And when you digitize this information, you need to show the importance of the gathered material. If you get some material and then you don't do anything with it, what good does that do for anyone? And then one thing I really wanted to talk about was that Reyes Escudero, one of the things that she said that stuck out to me was that we can anticipate what will be history. And if people aren't going out and documenting the underdocumented and getting these materials, then that history could essentially be gone or forgotten about. So I think it's very important to be diversifying all of this historical record so all of that can be saved and preserved. Raphael Chabran also gave a video lecture this week pertaining to food as culture. He brought up a term called Misty Sake, which is basically the concept of cultural fusion and the mixing and exchanging and blending of different traditions. He also clearly emphasized that food as culture is a fluid concept. It's always changing, it's always transforming. And he also talked about how technology plays an important part of food because it disseminates information about food. You can get online and go to a travel blog and you can pull up the food for a certain area in the world that you're going to. I know that I've traveled a whole bunch of different places and I've been able to start some new traditions based around food. And it's really cool that you can take different cultural traditions that are food-based and you can pick a little from one culture, pick a little from another, and create a whole entire almost food culture around yourself, which I think is really awesome. And that also reinforces the idea that it is constantly changing, it's constantly fluid from all of the little tidbits of stuff you're getting from everyone else.
wanted to say thank you to Professor Chabran for granting us this opportunity. In the same token, I also wanted to give a shout out to my group 1, Megan, Melissa, Julia. You guys are awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you.